I, 17F, lost my mom to cancer when I was 6 years old. The memories I have of her are fading, but I still remember her warm smile and the way she'd sing me to sleep every night. She was an elementary school teacher, and I used to love visiting her classroom after school. The walls were always covered with colorful artwork and projects from her students. I remember feeling so proud that my mom was the one all the kids loved. When she got sick, I didn't really understand what was happening. My dad, Tom, 45M, tried to shield me from the worst of it, but I could tell something was wrong. Mom spent more and more time in the hospital, and when she was home, she was too tired to play or sing. The last clear memory I have of her is sitting on her hospital bed, coloring together. She promised me she'd always be watching over me, even if I couldn't see her anymore. After she died, it was just me and Dad for a while. He was devastated, and looking back, I realize how hard he tried to keep it together for me. He'd make pancakes every Sunday morning, just like Mom used to, even though his were always a little burnt. He'd try to braid my hair for school, but it usually ended up a mess. We muddled through together, both of us missing Mom terribly but trying to create a new normal. When I was 7, Dad met Carmen, 38F, at a grief support group. I remember the first time he told me about her. We were at the park, sitting on Mom's favorite bench. He seemed nervous, fiddling with his wedding ring as he explained that he'd met a nice lady who'd lost her husband. At first, I was okay with it. I thought maybe Dad had found a friend who understood what we were going through. But things moved quickly. Within a few months, Carmen was coming over for dinner regularly. She'd bring board games or rent movies, trying to make it fun for me. But every time she was there, it felt like she was trying to take Mom's place. She'd sit in Mom's chair at the dinner table or use Mom's favorite mug for her coffee. It might seem small, but to a 7-year-old who was still grieving, it felt like a betrayal. 6 months after they met, Dad told me Carmen was moving in with us. I threw a huge tantrum, screaming that he was trying to replace Mom. Dad tried to explain that he wasn't replacing anyone, that he just didn't want to be lonely anymore. But all I could see was this stranger coming into our home, changing things, trying to be my new mom. Carmen tried really hard to bond with me from the beginning. She'd take me shopping, try to do my hair, and constantly ask about my day. But I just couldn't open up to her. Every time she tried to do something motherly, I'd shut down or lash out. I know now that I was probably acting out of grief and fear, but at the time, I just knew I didn't want another mom. When I was 9, Dad and Carmen got married. They wanted me to be a bridesmaid, but I refused. I wouldn't even attend the ceremony. I stayed with my grandparents that day, and I remember crying the entire time, feeling like I was betraying Mom's memory. My grandparents tried to comfort me, telling me that Mom would want Dad to be happy, but I couldn't see it that way. To me, it felt like everyone was trying to forget about Mom. Things got even more complicated when Carmen got pregnant shortly after the wedding. My half-brother, Ronald, 7M, was born when I was 10. Suddenly, I wasn't just dealing with a stepmom I didn't want, but also a half-sibling who seemed to represent everything I had lost. I remember the day they brought Ronald home from the hospital. Carmen was glowing, Dad couldn't stop smiling, and everyone was cooing over the baby. I felt more alone than ever. As Ronald grew older, the differences in how Carmen treated us became more apparent. With Ronald, she was naturally maternal and affectionate. She'd cover him in kisses, play for hours on the floor with him, and seemed to intuitively know what he needed. With me, everything felt forced and awkward. She'd try to hug me or tell me she loved me, but it always felt like she was reading from a script rather than expressing genuine emotion. The situation has only gotten worse as I've gotten older. Carmen seems determined to force a mother-daughter relationship between us, no matter how uncomfortable it makes me. She insists on coming to all my school events, tries to give me advice about boys and makeup, and even tried to plan a sweet 16 party for me last year, which I refused to attend. I remember one particularly awkward incident when I got my first period. Carmen tried to make it this big bonding moment, buying me pads and tampons and wanting to have the talk. But all I could think about was how this should have been a moment with my real mom. I locked myself in the bathroom and cried for hours. My dad has been no help in this situation. He keeps telling me to give Carmen a chance and that she's trying her best. But he doesn't seem to understand that I don't want or need another mother. I had a mom, and even though she's gone, she's still my mom. I've tried to explain this to him, but he always brushes it off, saying I need to move on and accept our new family. The tension at home is constant. Every family dinner feels like walking on eggshells. Carmen tries too hard, asking about every detail of my day. Dad gives me pointed looks if I don't respond enthusiastically enough. Ronald, caught in the middle of all this, often acts out to get attention. It's exhausting. I've started spending more and more time at my best friend Lily's house. Her family is so normal and drama-free. Sometimes I wish I could just live there instead. Things came to a head last week when Carmen tried to come with me to buy a prom dress. I told her I was going with Lily and some other friends, and she got really upset, saying she was hurt that I wouldn't let her be part of this mother-daughter moment. I finally snapped and told her she wasn't my mother and never would be. The aftermath of this fight has been awful. Carmen has been crying constantly, my dad is furious with me, and Ronald is confused and upset. I feel guilty for hurting Carmen's feelings, but I'm also angry that my feelings aren't being respected. I don't know what to do. I love my dad and Ronald, and I know Carmen isn't a bad person. But I can't keep pretending to be okay with this forced relationship. How do I set boundaries without destroying my family? Am I wrong for not being able to accept Carmen as a mother figure after all these years? Update 1, it's been about a month since my last post, and things have only gotten more complicated. After the prom dress incident, my dad sat me down for a serious talk. He told me that he understood I was still grieving my mom, but that it was time for me to move on and accept Carmen as my new mother. He even suggested that I start calling Carmen Mom to make her feel more included in the family. I was shocked and hurt by this conversation. It felt like my dad was trying to erase my mom's memory and replace her with Carmen. I told him that I would never call Carmen Mom and that he was being unfair to expect me to just forget about my real mother. This led to a huge argument. My dad accused me of being selfish and ungrateful for all that Carmen has done for me. He brought up how she's been there for all my school events, how she's tried to bond with me, and how she's always treated me like her own daughter. I countered by pointing out that I never asked for any of that, and that Carmen's actions often felt more like an obligation than genuine care. The argument ended with my dad grounding me and taking away my phone privileges. He said I could have them back when I learned to appreciate my family. For the next week, things were incredibly tense at home. Carmen kept trying to talk to me, saying she just wanted us to be close and that she loved me like her own daughter. I mostly stayed in my room to avoid these conversations. One day, while I was in my room, I found an old photo album tucked away in my closet. It was full of pictures of me and my mom. There were photos of us at the beach, baking cookies together, and one of her teaching me how to ride a bike. I spent hours looking through it, crying and remembering all the little moments I'd almost forgotten. When Carmen knocked on my door to call me for dinner, I quickly hid the album. I felt like I had to protect these memories, like they were a secret I couldn't share with my new family. Ronald, caught in the middle of all this, started acting out. He began having tantrums and refusing to go to school. I overheard Carmen telling my dad that my attitude was negatively affecting Ronald, which only added to the guilt I was already feeling. One afternoon, I came home from school to find Ronald crying in his room. When I asked him what was wrong, he said he was confused about why I didn't love Carmen like he did. He asked if it meant I didn't love him either, since we have different moms. It broke my heart. I tried to explain that I did love him, but that my feelings about Carmen were complicated. I'm not sure he really understood, but he seemed to feel better after we spent some time playing his favorite video game together. Things came to a head when I overheard Carmen and my dad discussing the possibility of family therapy. Carmen thought it would help us become a real family, while my dad seemed hesitant but willing to try. When they approached me about the idea, I refused. I told them that no amount of therapy was going to make me see Carmen as my mother, and that they needed to accept that. This led to another big argument, with my dad threatening to extend my grounding indefinitely if I didn't agree to therapy. Feeling cornered and frustrated, I reached out to my maternal grandparents. I hadn't told them about the issues with Carmen and my dad, partly out of loyalty to my dad and partly because I didn't want to worry them. But at this point, I felt like I had no other options. My grandparents were furious when they heard what was going on. They immediately called my dad and had a long, heated conversation with him. I couldn't hear everything, but I did hear my grandfather telling my dad that he was dishonoring my mom's memory by trying to force Carmen into her role. After the call, my dad seemed shaken. He returned my phone and lifted my grounding, but he hasn't really spoken to me since. Carmen has been quieter too, no longer trying to force conversations or bonding moments. The next day, I found a small box outside my bedroom door. Inside was my mom's old charm bracelet. I remembered her wearing it all the time when I was little. There was a note from my dad saying he'd been saving it for my 18th birthday, but he thought I might need it now. It was the first time in years that I felt like he really understood how much I still missed my mom. I've been wearing the bracelet every day since then. It's like having a little piece of my mom with me all the time. Carmen noticed it the other day and asked about it. For a moment, I thought about lying, but instead, I told her the truth. To my surprise, she didn't get upset or jealous. She just nodded and said it was beautiful. I'm relieved that the pressure has eased off a bit, but I'm also worried about what this means for our family going forward. The atmosphere at home is still very tense, and I'm not sure what's going to happen next. Part of me hopes that maybe this is a turning point, that maybe they'll finally understand and respect my feelings. But another part of me is scared that this is just the calm before another storm. Update 2. It's been 2 weeks since my last update, and the situation at home has taken an unexpected turn. A few days after my grandparents' intervention, my dad came to me and apologized. He admitted that he had been wrong to try and force a relationship between Carmen and me, and that he realized he had been unfair to my feelings and memories of my mom. We had a long talk, just the two of us. For the first time in years, we really opened up to each other. I told him how much it hurt when he seemed to want me to forget about Mom. He shared how guilty he felt for finding happiness with Carmen, like he was betraying Mom's memory. We both cried a lot, but it felt like we were finally on the same page. However, this apology came with a catch. My dad revealed that Carmen was pregnant again. They had been trying to have another child for a while, and they had just found out the news. My dad said he hoped that this new sibling might be a chance for all of us to come together as a family. I had mixed feelings about this news. On one hand, I was happy that my dad had finally acknowledged my feelings. On the other hand, the idea of another half-sibling made me feel even more like an outsider in my own family. Carmen's pregnancy has changed the dynamic in our house. She's been dealing with severe morning sickness, which means she's been too preoccupied to try and force a relationship with me. In a way, it's been a relief, but I also feel guilty for feeling relieved. Ronald has been excited about the prospect of being a big brother, but he's also been asking a lot of questions about why I don't call Carmen Mom like he does. It's been difficult trying to explain the situation to a 7-year-old without making him feel like our family is somehow less valid. One afternoon, Ronald and I were looking through some old photo albums together. He saw a picture of my mom and asked who she was. I told him she was my mom, and he got very confused. He asked if that meant Carmen wasn't my real mom. I tried to explain about stepmoms and half-siblings, but I could see it was a lot for him to process. My grandparents have been a great source of support through all of this. They've been calling regularly to check in on me, and they've even offered to let me stay with them for the summer if things get too tense at home. They've also been sharing more stories about my mom, which has been both comforting and bittersweet. The pregnancy announcement has also brought up a lot of emotions about my own mom. I've been looking through old photo albums and remembering things about her that I had almost forgotten. It's bittersweet. I'm glad to be reconnecting with these memories, but it also makes me miss her even more. Carmen seems to have picked up on this, and has been giving me more space. She even found a box of my mom's old things in the attic and gave them to me without any fanfare. It was probably the nicest thing she's ever done for me, and it made me wonder if maybe we could find a way to coexist peacefully, even if we'll never have the mother-daughter relationship she wanted. As for my dad, he's been trying to spend more one-on-one time with me. We've had a few conversations about my mom, and for the first time in years, I feel like he's really listening when I talk about her. It's not perfect, but it's progress. I'm still unsure about what the future holds for our family, especially with a new baby on the way. But for now, I'm cautiously optimistic that we might be able to find a new balance that respects everyone's feelings and boundaries. Update 3. It's been about a month since my last update, and a lot has happened. Carmen's pregnancy has been progressing, and she's now in her second trimester. The morning sickness has eased up, which has made things a bit calmer at home. However, new challenges have arisen. Last week, Carmen and my dad decided to find out the gender of the baby. They're having a girl. When they announced it at dinner, Carmen turned to me and said, "I hope you'll be a great big sister to her, just like you are to Ronald." I know she meant well, but it brought up a lot of complicated feelings. I couldn't help but think about how this little girl would have the mother-daughter relationship with Carmen that I never wanted. It made me feel like even more of an outsider. My dad must have noticed my reaction because he pulled me aside after dinner. He asked me how I was feeling about everything, and for the first time in a long time, I was completely honest with him. I told him about my fears of being replaced, about how much I still miss my mom, and about how confused and conflicted I feel about my place in our family. To my surprise, my dad really listened. He told me that no one could ever replace my mom, not for him and not for me. He apologized again for trying to force a relationship between Carmen and me, and he promised that he would do better in the future. This conversation led to a family meeting where we all sat down, me, my dad, Carmen, and even Ronald, to discuss our family dynamics. It wasn't easy, and there were some tears, mostly from Carmen and my dad, but I think it was necessary. We came up with some new family rules. 1. Carmen agreed to stop trying to force a mother-daughter relationship with me. Instead, we're going to try to build a friendship based on mutual respect. 2. My dad promised to spend more one-on-one time with me and Ronald, to ensure we both feel valued. 3. We're going to start having a monthly Remember Mom Day, where we look at photos and share memories of my mom. This was actually Carmen's idea, which surprised me. 4. I agreed to be more involved in family activities, but with the understanding that I can opt out if I'm feeling overwhelmed. It's not a perfect solution, and I know we'll still have challenges ahead, especially when the new baby arrives. But for the first time in a long time, I feel like my feelings are being heard and respected. The day after our family meeting, Carmen approached me with an idea. She suggested that we could work together to create a memory book for my mom, something that we could share with Ronald and the new baby when they're older. At first, I was hesitant, it felt like such a personal project. But as we talked about it more, I realized it might be a good way for Carmen to understand more about my mom and for me to keep her memory alive in our growing family. We've started working on it a little bit each week. Carmen asks me questions about mom, and I share stories and memories. It's been surprisingly nice to talk about mom with someone who didn't know her. Carmen seems genuinely interested, and she's even helped me remember some things I'd forgotten. Ronald has been joining us sometimes, asking questions about the grandmother he never knew. It's bittersweet to see him get to know mom through our stories, but it also feels right. I want him to know about her, to understand why she's still such an important part of my life. As for the new baby, I'm still processing my feelings about her arrival. Part of me is excited to be a big sister again, but another part is worried about how it will change our family dynamic. Carmen has been good about not pushing me to be too involved in the pregnancy stuff, which I appreciate. I'm still planning to spend part of the summer with my grandparents, which everyone agreed would be good for me. But I'm no longer dreading coming home at the end of it. My grandparents are even talking about coming to visit more often once the baby is born, which I think will be good for everyone. Last weekend, Dad and I went on a hike together, just the two of us. We used to do this all the time when I was younger, but it's been years since our last one. As we were resting at the top of the trail, looking out over the view, Dad turned to me and said, "Your mom would be so proud of the young woman you've become." It meant more to me than I can express. I know we have a long way to go, but I'm cautiously hopeful about the future of our blended family. It may not look like what Carmen originally wanted, or what my dad initially tried to force, but maybe we can create something that works for all of us. It won't be perfect, and I'm sure we'll still have our struggles, but for the first time in a long time, I feel like we're all trying to understand and respect each other's feelings. I'm not ready to call Carmen Mom, and I don't think I ever will be. But maybe, with time, we can build a relationship that's meaningful in its own way. And maybe, just maybe, this new baby will help bring us all a little closer together.